Listen, I need you to hear this story all the way through, because what happened to Aisha Johnson is something that almost nobody talks about, yet it happens more often than we realize. Aisha was a rising star in a company everyone thought was fair, professional, and above petty biases. She had worked hard her whole life, always aiming to prove herself, always striving to do the right thing. She gave everything to her career, staying late, perfecting every presentation, double-checking every report, making sure no detail was ever overlooked. She loved her work, and she loved the idea that merit mattered more than anything else. But one day, she began to notice small things that didn't make sense. The praise she deserved went elsewhere. Projects she completed flawlessly were suddenly questioned. Comments were made in meetings that seemed offhanded, yet somehow left her feeling like she was being watched, measured, judged unfairly. At first, she thought she was imagining it. Maybe she was being too sensitive. Maybe she had misread the tone. But then, it started happening more often, a pattern emerging that she could no longer ignore. A colleague's minor mistake would be excused, overlooked, even celebrated, while she was scrutinized, critiqued, and subtly undermined. Emails that should have taken minutes of recognition instead carried thinly veiled doubts. Suggestions she offered in meetings were dismissed, downplayed, or worse, claimed by someone else as their own. And the person orchestrating all of this? Her manager, Linda Pearson, a woman who everyone admired for her authority and success, but who seemed to view Aisha not as a talented professional, but as a threat. Then there was Mark Reynolds, a colleague who was friendly on the surface, but thrived in that same system. Someone whose ideas and contributions were often amplified while Aisha's were minimized. And the company's HR department? When she tried to raise concerns, the responses were polite but empty. Excuses wrapped in formal language, promises that nothing would change, and an action that spoke louder than words. By this time, Aisha realized the pattern was too deliberate to be coincidental. She began to feel the weight of every microaggression, every dismissal, every subtle act that chipped away at her confidence and made her question her own worth. Not because she was failing, but because the system around her was designed to fail her. She had worked tirelessly, given everything, and still, she was being pushed to the side. And then it happened. One morning, she received the news she had been dreading but never thought could happen. Her employment had been terminated. The reason? Officially, underperformance. Officially, a failure to meet expectations. Officially, a professional judgment that made her look like the problem. But Aisha knew the truth. She had done nothing wrong. Everything she had accomplished, every late night, every flawless project, every strategic contribution, every positive review, every recognition that had ever come her way, could not be undone by some form letter claiming inadequacy. The reality was this: she was too black. Her skin, her presence, the very fact that she existed as a confident, competent, ambitious black woman in that space, had triggered insecurity and jealousy in those around her. And that's when she decided she would not stay silent. She would not allow herself to be erased, dismissed, or misrepresented. But before she could take action, she had to gather the truth. She needed evidence, proof that this was not a mistake, not a coincidence, but deliberate, calculated, discriminatory behavior. That's where Daniel Cruz came in, a colleague who had noticed what was happening, who had observed the unfair treatment from the sidelines, but had chosen not to ignore it. He began documenting everything. Emails, notes from meetings, phone conversations, all the small things that together formed an undeniable pattern. And Aisha, for the first time in months, felt like she wasn't alone. She had support, even if quietly, and together, they began piecing together a case that would expose the injustice. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? What city, what town, or what country are you in? If you're ready to hear the full story and see how someone can stand up against unfairness and win in a system stacked against, then make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the like button on this video. This story isn't just about one woman. It's about every person who has ever been doubted, dismissed, or told they don't belong because of the color of their skin. Now, let me take you back to those first moments when the pressure began. When Aisha started noticing that every accomplishment she made seemed to come under a microscope that others didn't have to walk through. She stayed late nights, often alone in the office, rechecking every report, rehearsing every presentation, preparing for meetings that felt increasingly hostile. Each time Linda or Mark made a subtle remark, she felt it like a pinprick, sharp and unnerving, a reminder that no matter how perfect her work was, it could be twisted, misinterpreted, or erased entirely. And every time she asked for clarification or tried to speak up, the responses were polite but dismissive. "You're probably overthinking it. We just want to make sure everyone understands the bigger picture." Words that sounded harmless, but that weighed heavily, creating doubt in the minds of others around her, and, eventually, even in her own mind. By the time she realized what was happening, months had passed. She had endured countless small humiliations, microaggressions, and subtle attacks that no one else seemed willing to challenge. Her confidence had been chipped away piece by piece, and yet she had kept working, kept performing, kept striving to prove that she deserved her place. And then the firing letter arrived. That cold, impersonal, official document that attempted to reduce her months of excellence into a few words. Underperformance. But Aisha had learned something critical over those months. The truth has a way of finding its way out, no matter how tightly you try to keep it hidden. And this is where the story takes a turn, where the fight becomes not just about survival, but about justice. Because the very people who tried to silence her had underestimated something far more powerful than authority or prejudice. Her determination to be seen for who she truly was, for what she had actually accomplished, for her undeniable competence and worth. And as she began to prepare her case, to gather the evidence that Daniel had been collecting, she realized that this was bigger than just her job. It was about setting the record straight, about showing the world that discrimination, subtle or blatant, cannot be hidden forever, that those who attempt to dismiss someone because of the color of their skin will eventually face the truth. And with every email saved, every recording backed up, every note collected, Aisha felt her strength returning. She began to understand that losing her job wasn't the end. It was the catalyst that forced her to see the reality, to confront it, and to take action. And action she would take, not in anger, but with precision, with purpose, and with the clarity of someone who had endured enough to know what justice really looks like. The months that followed were grueling. She worked with a lawyer to craft a case that would hold up, to ensure that every moment of evidence could not be dismissed or ignored. Every conversation, every message, every decision that had been made against her would be documented and presented in a way that could no longer be twisted. She relived every small humiliation, every meeting, every dismissal, every moment she had been doubted, and transformed it into fuel, a weapon of truth that she could wield. And while all of this was happening, she never lost sight of the fact that her dignity, her professionalism, and her integrity were hers alone. No one could take that from her, and it became her guiding principle as she prepared to confront the system that had tried to erase her. Every night, as she sat reviewing evidence, she reminded herself, "This is not just for me. This is for anyone who has ever been told that their presence, their talent, or their potential is somehow unacceptable because of who they are." And in that moment, Aisha understood the true power of perseverance, of documenting truth, and of refusing to allow injustice to go unchallenged. That's where we leave part one of her story, at the moment when the fight begins in earnest, when the tools of evidence and truth are ready, and when Aisha stands on the precipice of finally confronting those who tried to silence her. When the day came for Aisha to finally present the evidence, she felt a calm determination she had never known before. Every email, every recording, every note that had documented the pattern of bias and discrimination now formed an unbreakable chain of truth. She met with the lawyer and shared everything Daniel had collected, and together they laid out the case that would not only challenge the company's decision but expose the systemic prejudice that had gone unchecked for far too long. When the company was confronted, at first there was denial, polite excuses, and attempts to minimize the situation, but the weight of the evidence was undeniable. It wasn't just one comment or one meeting. It was months of deliberate actions that had targeted her, tried to silence her, and attempted to erase her contributions. Aisha remained composed as the facts were presented. She did not shout. She did not beg. She allowed the evidence to speak for itself, and it spoke louder than any words ever could. Slowly, those around her began to understand the reality of what had happened, that this was not about performance or merit, but about prejudice. Linda Pearson tried to defend herself, offering explanations that rang hollow, excuses that could not withstand scrutiny. And as the truth emerged, the company had no choice but to acknowledge what had occurred. Aisha's termination was reversed in principle, her reputation restored, and steps were taken to ensure that no one else would suffer the same treatment. But the resolution was about far more than her personal vindication. It was about sending a message that fairness, integrity, and truth matter, that no one should be silenced for simply being who they are. The day Aisha returned to work, she walked with a new sense of purpose. Colleagues approached her with apologies, with support, and with a recognition of her strength and resilience. Daniel Cruz, who had stood by her quietly, finally received public acknowledgement for his courage, and together they began to rebuild a workplace where talent and dedication could truly be valued, free from discrimination. And yet, Aisha's victory was not just professional. It was deeply personal. She had endured months of doubt, humiliation, and the heavy weight of prejudice. Yet she had emerged with her dignity intact, her sense of justice reaffirmed, and a clear understanding of her own worth. She realized that the fight had never truly been against a single person or even a single company. It had been against a system that too often allows bias to flourish quietly, against the subtle ways society can tell someone they do not belong. And through her perseverance, she had shown that standing up, documenting truth, and refusing to be silenced can bring change, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Aisha spent hours reflecting on what had happened, on the long nights of stress and uncertainty, on the moments of doubt when it would have been easy to give up. She understood now that those moments had not weakened her. They had strengthened her. They had prepared her to act with clarity, to confront injustice with courage, and to become a model of resilience for others. And she realized something even more profound. The victory was not hers alone. Every person who had ever felt powerless, every individual who had been told they were not enough because of the color of their skin, every voice that had been ignored had a small part in her fight. By standing up, documenting the truth, and refusing to accept the lie, Aisha had created a ripple effect that would reach far beyond her own life. She had forced a system to confront its own biases and had given others the courage to do the same. The months that followed were a mix of healing, reflection, and action. Aisha began mentoring other colleagues, especially women of color, helping them navigate professional challenges and teaching them the importance of self-advocacy. She shared her story in internal meetings, workshops, and eventually in broader forums, using her experience not to dwell on the injustice, but to highlight the importance of perseverance, integrity, and the power of truth. And while the memory of what she had endured never completely faded, it became a source of strength. She knew that she had faced something that would have broken many people, but she had turned it into an opportunity to create change, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. Her life had changed in a way that went far beyond her job title or salary. She had earned respect, recognition, and a renewed sense of purpose. More importantly, she had reclaimed control over her narrative. refusing to let fear or prejudice define who she was or what she could achieve. And here is what I want you to understand about Aisha's story. It is not just a story about being fired, about discrimination, or about one woman's struggle in an office. It's about choices. It's about the moments when you could stay silent or speak up, when you could accept injustice or fight for what is right. It's about the power each of us has to change the story, to stand against unfairness, and to demand accountability, even when it seems impossible. Aisha had choices every single day. She could have left quietly, accepted the termination, and moved on. She could have allowed the injustice to define her, to break her spirit. But instead, she chose to see the truth, to document it, and to act. She chose to confront the system, to hold those responsible accountable, and to protect not only herself, but others who might face the same treatment in the future. And in doing so, she not only regained her place in the company, but she created a legacy of courage, integrity, and resilience. She proved that standing up for yourself is not just an act of survival. It is an act of justice, and it is something that inspires others to do the same. Now I want to ask you, the person listening to this story, to take a moment and think about your own life. Where have you faced situations where silence seemed easier than action? When did you feel powerless, but knew deep down that standing up could make a difference? This story is meant to remind you that courage isn't always loud, and justice isn't always immediate. But every small act, every decision to speak, document, and resist can create change. Aisha's journey shows us that integrity and perseverance matter more than comfort or convenience. That facing unfairness, even when it seems overwhelming, can lead to outcomes far beyond what we imagined. That one person, armed with truth and determination, can challenge an entire system and force it to be better. And the most important lesson is this: injustice may try to hide behind bureaucracy, polite language, or empty formalities, but truth cannot be silenced forever. The courage to confront it, the persistence to expose it, and the refusal to let it define you are what lead to real change. And now, if you felt inspired by Aisha's story, if it has reminded you that standing up for yourself and others matters, then I want you to do something. I want you to subscribe to this channel, hit that like button on this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Because stories like Aisha's aren't just about one person, they are about all of us. And the lessons we take from them can change the way we act, the way we respond, and the way we see the world. Remember, courage is built in the moments when no one is watching, and integrity is proven in the choices we make when it would be easier not to choose. Aisha chose to fight, she chose to stand, and she chose justice over comfort. And that is the story that we should all carry forward.